Well, good morning, everyone. I have so much space up here. Usually I'm on a little stage, and I get to be way up here. This is kind of fun. And I can see all of you so much more clearly. Glad that you're here with us this morning. My name is Michael, and I am one of the pastors here at Cedarbrook. And we are continuing on in our message series with this letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to this small congregation, small group of people in Philippi. That's ancient Greece. And he wrote to them because he was in prison and they were concerned about him. Now, when you think about prison, don't just think about, going to jail and it's, in lockdown. No, that was basically a hole in the ground that you were put in with a bunch of other people, and the guard was just there to make sure no one got out. And so if there was anything that any of the prisoners needed, like clothing and things like that, it had to be brought to them. And so they brought him a gift from Philippi. These people that were poor and often outcasts in their society because of what they believed. They believed that Jesus was their Lord and their Savior, and that caused a lot of problems because they didn't worship the gods of the Roman Empire, so it caused problems for them. They couldn't get jobs, or they would get fired from jobs, or there was pressure on them. They would be seen as rebels and things like that. And that's why Paul is ending up in prison. And today, as we continue on with this message from where we went from last week and ending it of how we are to conduct ourselves, people that are followers of Jesus, conduct ourselves in a manner that is worthy of the gospel of Jesus, worthy of God's arrival of God's kingdom where Jesus is king, we're going to put that into practice. So we're going to see some examples of what that looks like. How are we to do that? How do we live that out? And I think examples are really important for us, right? We need to have examples in our life. I know for me, when I'm trying to do something new that I haven't done before, usually in a construction type of thing, it's helpful for me to see an example of it, and then I can go and try to do it myself. But we think about that in a lot of areas of our lives, that we need an example. Maybe you have some great examples in your life of an older sibling or an older friend, or maybe you have a parent or a grandparent or another relative that's been really influential as an example for how you live your life. Or if you don't have that, you know how important an example is as well, don't you? We'd love to have that example in your life. And so what is the example that we can have for us to live this life in Jesus? And what's at the real core of that? And that's what we're going to get at today. We're going to turn to Philippians chapter 2. I invite you to do that now. If you do not have your own Bible or you didn't bring one and you would like one to follow along with, just raise your hand nice and high. We'll have an usher get you a Bible. Don't be shy. Keep it up there, and we'll get you a Bible. Or you can go to cedarbrook.info and follow along there as well. Now, this example idea of what Paul is going to lean into, he's going to give them some statements that they would all agree on. And it's kind of implied that it would be in the affirmative, that they would agree on what he is saying. And it's important for them because where he's going to go next. It's like a transitional piece for him. So let's take a look at Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Here's what he writes. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, we're going to stop there. He's setting it up. He's implying that, of course, they have been this encouragement by being united with Jesus. The whole world is being rocked right now, and their families are not accepted, and their work maybe have fired them, and the Roman government's coming down on them because of their belief in Jesus, but they have encouragement by being united in Jesus. Okay, we can agree with that. Is there comfort from Jesus' love? You've experienced that as well. A common sharing. It's this word that we use called fellowship, this fellowship with God's Spirit, and there's tenderness and compassion. You've felt those things in your life, talking to the Philippians church. If that is true, then he says this in the next verse, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So if you've experienced this from Jesus, right, this relationship with him and God's Spirit living in you, then you can make, as he's saying to the Philippians church, you can make Paul's joy. He's sitting in a hole in the ground, guys, right? And he's going to have joy because of the way they're going to be treating one another. That they're not going to just be looking out for their own selves, but they're going to be looking out for each other. And there's an interesting line in here when you look at it. Interesting line where he says that they are to think of others as above themselves, better than themselves. And I feel like that can be misunderstood. In their day and age, it was all about self-promotion. You promoted yourself. It was just the way to go. And so he's trying to tackle that of saying, no, promote others, not just yourself. But when we read that, we might think of like, oh, well, then I just don't really think very highly of myself. I need to think lower than myself because other people are better than me. And that's not what he's saying. He's trying to describe what humility looks like and what humility is. It's at the core of what we need to be a follower of Jesus, to live out this example of Christ. So what is humility? Is humility just this like thinking horrible about yourself, that you have nothing to offer, nothing to give, everyone else is better than you? Well, that's not humility. Humility is not thinking less about yourself. Humility is thinking about yourself less. Does that make sense? You gotta get it? Okay? Humility is not thinking less about yourself. It's thinking about yourself less. They're not so focused just on you and your needs and your wants and what's best for you, or even justifying that to what's best for you and your family, your friends, right? It's about considering others and what is good for them. In fact, he's going to really lean into this humility idea with an example. And he's going to start with that example in this next verse. There's just one little verse I want to read because it's all caught up in this. You look at verse 5. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Okay, he's going to then give an example of what that looks like. But it's all tied with this humility idea of just not thinking less about themselves, but thinking about themselves less, and something that's more important just in their own needs and interests and their own ambition. And Jesus is that perfect example of that. His whole mindset, his whole being was about that. And now he's going to sing a song. This next section here is a song that the early church would have sung together. It's a worship song. And it has all of these elements of what Jesus has done in his humility, giving that example. And we're going to see something really cool and fascinating, at least it was for me as I was diving into this. We're going to see the way that they think about the world, right? Their concept of the world has everything to do with what's up in the skies or the heavens, what's here on the ground, like where we live, this earth, and then under the earth. And we're going to see all three of those things in this example and how Jesus addresses all of those things. In other words, their whole cosmology, their whole way that they think of the world is caught up in this next song, okay? Let's take the first part. You'll see it there. Starting in verse 6. Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Now, let me point this out to you. You see where he started? In the heavenly realms. But even there, he's like, but I'm not going to use all of this divine power and prestige for myself. I'm going to offer that up. I'm going to humble myself, come down to earth as a human being, right? From the heavens to the earth, to even dying a criminal's death on a cross. And what happens when you die? You get put under the earth, right? So all levels are being addressed here. Now, I want us to see this because this is going to really come into play as he continues his letter. Listen to the next part of this song, okay? You're going to see it here even more abundantly. Therefore, God exalted Jesus, to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Right? Are we hearing this? Are we seeing that their whole world, everything that they understand about their world, is being addressed here? Everything in heaven, on earth, and under the earth is being addressed. That's what Jesus did. He humbled himself from heaven to being here on earth, to giving up his life and dying, going under the earth. And in response to that, what happens? God elevates Jesus and has to the highest name in heaven. The highest name that everybody is going to bow their knee as an act of worship to who Jesus is. Every tongue is going to acknowledge or confess that Jesus is the one that's Lord. Now, maybe for us, it doesn't quite hit home as much as it might be for the people in Philippi. Maybe because in their day, being under the Roman government, being led by the Emperor Caesar, that once a year, everyone under the Roman government had to bend their knee to Caesar. They had to acknowledge that Caesar was Lord. Now this hits a little bit harder, doesn't it? No wonder why they're getting in trouble with Rome, because they won't bow their knee to Caesar. They won't say that Caesar's Lord. They're saying that this criminal that died on a cross and rose again 3 days later, he's the one that they bow their knee to as an act of worship. He's the one that they acknowledge as their Lord. It has a whole different meaning. And it takes on this whole meaning of that now they are being spotlighted, right? They're being in the spotlight. Everyone is looking to them as examples of what does it mean to bow your knee and acknowledge Jesus as the Lord, to worship him with everything in your life. And Paul is now going to lean into that, talking about how their obedience is so important for this next part of how they can be this example. Verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Who is this about? Who is their life about? It's about God and God's will and his purposes. They are to humble themselves the way Jesus has, so that they can be a part of what God is doing. Every area of their life, no matter how bad their life gets, this is the way to have the mindset of Christ. Not about their own selfish ambition, what they might have lost, what they might gain, but they start thinking about something other than themselves. And it's about God's purpose. Now, he doesn't stop here. He continues with this, and this is where it's really going to hit home for them. Of what are they supposed to do? What does it look like? How do they act? What is the example that they're giving to everyone in heaven and earth that are watching? What do they do? Verse 14. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. And that's just right there, I have to stop to really get the right mindset about what is happening here and what Paul is telling this small church in this town of Philippi that's under this Roman occupation, that they are seen as outcasts and maybe even rebels. They may be fearful of their life, of what could happen to them. They've got a lot of loss in their life because of family relationships and for sure job opportunities. And how are they supposed to conduct themselves that's in a manner that's worthy of the rival of God's kingdom, where Jesus is king, where they've bowed their knee to him and said that he is Lord. How do they conduct themselves? Without arguing, without complaining, without fighting, without retaliating. Instead, they are going to be the ones that are going to shine like these stars in the sky. And just think about that. Stars in the sky. Can you see the stars here while you're standing on earth, on the ground? Yeah. There are these shining examples for everyone to see what it looks like to follow Jesus everywhere they go, in everything that they do. They are the ones that are the examples. That's who they are, right? They're these lights up in the heavens that everyone can see, and it draws everyone's attention. That's what they get to become. And for us, as followers of Jesus, guess what? That's who we are. We are to be these lights that everyone can turn to and everyone can see as examples of what it looks like to follow Jesus with all humility, with all obedience, not thinking of what's best for ourselves, our families, our tribe, or our group, or whatever, but what's best for God. What's his will and his purposes for our life, to communicate his love and his compassion and his mercy, right? That's where we started with it. That's what we experience, and that encouragement, we show that to everybody. So in humility, what does it look like for us? That we humbly take a look at the world around us. And when people are looking at us to be humble and to be like Jesus, we look at maybe some jobs in our life, some things that nobody else wants to do, and we raise our hand and say, I will do that. Maybe it's for students, right? You got that kid at a lunch table that sits all by themselves. Nobody wants to sit with that kid. And you raise your hand and said, well, I'll do that. Even at the loss of my own reputation, I'm going to sit with that kid. It's like saying that if there's a sacrifice that needs to be made, I'll make it. That's what it looks like to be these shining stars, these shining examples of who Jesus is in all humility, not thinking about what's best for ourselves or our own ambition, but thinking what's best to move God's kingdom forward. That's who we are. We are these shining examples. Now, Paul is going to go on and give a couple of examples. We already have the one of Jesus for sure, but what about people that are following Jesus? Well, there's going to be a young man that travels with Paul. His name is Timothy. And he's going to talk about Timothy, how everyone knows of his character. It's been tested, it's tried and true, and you can use him as an example. And then he's going to pick somebody right from the church in Philippi that brought the message about and the gift to Paul while he's in prison from Philippi. His name is Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus. Any Epaphroditus here? No? Okay. Epaphroditus comes to visit him and gets really sick. And the church in Philippi hears about it, and they're concerned for him. And he's now concerned that they're concerned about him, right? He's experienced that fellowship. And yet he is this shining example to them about how they conduct themselves in this, warped and crooked generation. He's a shining example of what it looks like to be like Jesus with all humility. And we're not even done with that for us here. We have some shining examples for us to look to today. We have people being baptized here, people that have said, you know what, I'm bowing my knee in an act of worship to Jesus. I'm acknowledging that Jesus is my Lord, and I'm going to be obedient to him with all humility and having that same mindset as Jesus. And this act of baptism is not the thing that saves them, it's that worship and that confession that brings them into salvation. And they're working out their salvation through obeying God's will. And here's the cool thing. They're the shining stars in the sky that we get to look at. We get to see them, and we're not the only ones watching. heaven is watching too, watching to see how they are going to respond. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to have this outward display of this inward decision that they've made. They're going to be getting into this little hot tub here, and they're going to be standing here on earth with all of us and heaven watching, and then they're going to go down under the water like Christ did into the grave and be raised back up into new life following Jesus. There are examples that we get to turn to and we get to look to. And what it looks like to be like Jesus. And we're going to get to come around them and support them. So I'm going to invite them up so you can hear their stories and how they've come to follow Jesus. And then we're going to do baptism. Come on up.